You're tuned in to a special edition of the Holt Presents Community Conversations podcast. What you're about to listen to was recorded on December 2nd, 2024, in front of a live audience at the Art House in Eugene, Oregon. We've added questions from the attendees with voiceovers for your convenience. Thank you for listening.
The program that's most aligned with tonight's conversation is our Spark program. I'll let you guess which logo is the Spark logo. But that is our out-of-school STEM opportunities for middle school, high school, and even up to age 24, learning how to use microcontrollers, work in the tech industry, and kind of anything in between. So without further ado, I'm obviously up here not alone, and I'm not going to be talking the whole evening, but I'd like my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. You're going to have to kind of follow along on the slides to see who's talking when, but I think we're just going to go down the line, and actually it looks pretty much in line. Well, not quite, never mind. Almost. I'm just going to give you the first rundown so you can follow easier. This is John Park. He's the first in top left. Hiba Ali, right there, right under there, bottom left. And then there's Parker Bracey, bottom right. And then Mitra Gruel, top right. Okay, I'm going to pass it to them to introduce themselves.
All right, hello and welcome everyone. I'm John Park. I'm representing Harmonic Laboratories. So we're an art group that's been working in town since 2010. And our group specifically has been creating opportunities for other artists through collaboration and specifically mixing art and technology to create new infrastructure for artists and new opportunities, collaborative opportunities that just normally wouldn't exist. I'm also part of the faculty on the Art and Technology program within the University of Oregon's Department of Art, and have been teaching there for 17 years now.
Hi everyone, I'm Hiba Ali. I'm an assistant professor at University of Oregon. A lot of the work I make is immersive installations, so that means using digital art and ways of technology and sculpture as a way to immerse the body. I've been working on this term called digital somatics, which means to connect the body through technology towards like calming and healing spaces. And as a part of this, I do workshops, I do storytelling, I do exhibitions, and do research on the ways that the body and mind can be reconnected through technology.
My name is Parker Bracey. I work with Justin here at Spark, and I help just host programs and mentor and do different things. And I started as a youth in the program, which I think is pretty cool. And yeah, so, a little bit about me is I like to make clothes, and yeah.
Hi, is this working? My name is Mitra Gruel. Hello. Okay. Hi, my name is Mitra Gruel, and I represent, I'm representing a lot of things. I do a lot of things. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for MECA, which stands for the Materials, Exchange. Materials Exchange Center for Community Arts, and I develop programming using recycled and upcycled materials. We represent a lot of emerging and youth artists there, create opportunities for arts. We have a resale arts store where people can donate materials to be used in the arts. I also myself am an upcycle fashion designer, so Parker and I have that in common. And I teach industrial sewing at a nonprofit called Viking Textile Maker Hub. I do a lot of things, but I love working in the realm of waste materials and design.
All right, and that's a perfect segue into our next conversation, which really is about, as you can see, like the panelists we've assembled here work with high-tech, upcycling, kind of everything in between, because really Back to the Future is that blend of old and new technology, and how can we use everything involved as resources and not just striving for new. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, I'll do the, this Broadway production is produced by, I think it's Bob Gale. Robert Zemeckis is a name I've always known for a long time. Bob Gale is one I had to kind of learn. But Zemeckis, he did like Polar Express and like The Christmas Story, like all these kinds of 3D, borderline 3D animation, but like kind of pushing the lines of like how real can animation get. Before some people thought it got kind of creepy, but like that's that's in everyone's opinion. But this production really kind of brought it to the stage, which when I first thought about Back to the Future on a stage, I couldn't visualize it at all, even when I was told about it. I couldn't visualize it. I probably still can't. I probably won't be able to until I see it. But really, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, Marty McFly, Doc Brown, the two main characters in the first movie, and basically it's a play on, like, they figure out time travel. Marty McFly gets sent back to 1955, and just by the way time travel works, or is meant to work, but mainly by being there, you can affect the future and change it, and he has to prevent that from happening. Okay, so if you haven't seen the movie, I'm sorry. It's kind of a synopsis. It all turns out fine in the end. But through those themes of the movie, which I never really thought about watching it back in the 80s as a kid, which I'm really happy I did now, but the themes that are really involved, I think, are kind of nicely tucked in there. So a main one being failure before success, which anybody in any job needs to kind of learn this. It's just kind of part of life. But like failure as a learning mode is something that, like, if you're a trained teacher, that's something you start to learn, but something that's not always spoken about in the classroom exactly, but it yet is so important, especially for innovation and working in tech, and anybody who wants to work in engineering, or again, for a life lesson, I think it's across the board, but certainly in like the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, failure as a learning mode is crucial, and there's tons of examples in this story of failure, 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 keep trying, keep innovating until you succeed. And so it's a really positive message that, again, as a kid in the 80s, probably didn't grasp it completely, but now looking back. And also creative problem solving. When, again, not too many spoilers, but when Marty McFly is sent back in time, he has to replicate the mechanics of the time machine, which doesn't fully operate back in 1955 because of different limitations. And so he has to replace certain things with what's available. So this particular time machine runs on plutonium. That hadn't been created, or nobody had worked out the way to actually use it back in 1955. So he has to use a bolt of lightning to replicate that much energy generation. If anyone can remember the exact amount of energy, 1.21 gigawatts. There you go, yeah. It's going to have some hardcore fans here. But then on top of that, you have like a DeLorean, which is an ancient kind of car at this point, but 88 miles per hour. Getting cars back in the 1950s to go that fast was darn near impossible. Things like that all of a sudden you're in this whole nother time mode and having to replicate things from, I guess at that time it was like 30 years or something, but having to replicate those using old technology was a really cool challenge after challenge after challenge, and using the creative problem solving that they did was really, really awesome to see. So, with those as our kind of main themes for the night, I'm going to open up one question first for all of our panelists. There's no particular order, but to tackle, and also if anybody in the audience wants to chime in at different times with their answer, I think after the panelists answer, we have time. It's a small audience, so we would love to get some participation. So our first question for this evening is really just, what does creative innovation mean to you? I'll let anybody who wants to start first.
I'll start, I guess. Creative innovation is what drives me, wakes me up at 4 a.m. I think it's a way of training one's mind to think in a certain way. For me, this is how I experience it, at least. Because of what I do, which I'll go into in my portion of this session, once you train your mind to think along the lines of creative problem solving, any problem or encounter you have in your life as you go along, instead of being like, oh, that's frustrating, why hasn't someone figured this out? You're just like, oh, you know what would be really cool right here is this, and then you start waking up and thinking about it and dreaming about it and seeing it everywhere, and it's like really fun. It's kind of like a game for me, but it drives me, it makes me excited to share. It is something I think can be sparked in other people and taught and inspired in others, and I think it's what we need for the future as well.
Yeah, I just want to follow up with that. Yeah, when you mentioned like turn it into a game, I think about the idea of play and reinvigorating play, because often when we you know, in our adult world, things are very, kind of set up to be in a very highly structured way. And one thing that kids do so naturally is just engage in a sense of play, make believe, that kind of thing. And as we get older, we're taught to not to kind of put this world of imagination or make believe away. But one of the greatest things for artists and all kinds of creative minds is engaging in a sense of play, in a sense of make believe, in a sense of dreaming beyond our own possibilities. I'm inviting that as a daily part of practice. I was just talking to some faculty at the University of Oregon earlier, and we're talking about grading, and we have all these like assignments piled up, and they're like, "What's your strategy for grading?" And I just shared like I turned into a game. So I'll give myself like half an hour of grading, and then I have to go watch my favorite TV show. And right now I'm binge watching Charmed. So I turn into a game, you know. And so like it's a small kind of like hack, but I think that naturally inviting play into my everyday through these modes that create a sense of joy and also like gratitude. And that's what I think innovation is to remember that. And also to what was shared earlier about the idea of like trying and trying again, trying different iterations, moving things around in a way that invites flexibility, and away from necessarily the rigidity that is so part of our everyday.
I think to add on to that, when I think about innovation, I think about problem solving comes to mind, and I'm sure there are examples of non-creative innovation, I suppose, although it sort of feels like a true innovation must be creative in some way. But I do think of it as a moment to think about what is the normative, what's the standard way of thinking, the standard way of operating, which may not have been working very well, and to invite a turn, a pivot. And sometimes that's just in the mind, and sometimes it's very personal, but oftentimes it leads to solutions or ways of thinking that are much more exciting and much more creative. And I think writers and storytellers are very good at thinking of what is the common narrative right now versus how can we excite people by a new story.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think creative innovation isn't just coming up with like crazy ideas, but instead like making them practical and real. I think that's a really cool part about just what we get to do here, and especially with my job, just being able to create some like wild idea and thinking like, oh, there's no way I can bring this into like reality, and then doing that is really cool. Just being able to impact the world through some kind of art, technology, science, like any other field, I think is very inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a piece of when Hibba was speaking of that flow state of, and then tying that in with like the learning, failure as a learning mode, seeing that failure as not failure, and again, even the word failure now, we have to like get away from that, but when something doesn't work out, not seeing it as the next challenge or like a negative, but just like the positivity of it, and like I'm just trying different things. That's the game, right? The game is like trying to like beat a level of a video game almost, when you're like re-engineering something or playing with it and tinkering with it until it works. That is the game, where you're kind of reaching that flow state and that creativity of bending your mind to get the different solution. Different way of thinking about it, I guess. Actually, the first panelist questions I have are the first questions are for Mitra, and so we'll give you the spotlight for a little bit. The first question we have for Mitra is just how does the use of old and repurposed materials aid in your creative process?
I love this question. So short answer is they define my creative process, or they have come to define it as it is currently, which is always changing. So I started working with these materials out of necessity and affordability and access. So as a fledgling young fashion designer, I just used what I had around me, used what was discarded because it was cheap or free and just around. I started making things out of my kids' clothes as they outgrew them. I sold stuff on eBay, like went to thrift stores, so I would find stuff that was damaged and cheap. As I worked with these materials more, I started developing my design process around the damage of the materials, and I realized it would inspire designs that were unique. So you take something like a t-shirt, And what commonly is damaged on a t-shirt, maybe the armpits are stained. So you come up with designs around avoiding the armpits, and then as soon as you start cutting that out, you start seeing these shapes emerge from the shape of a t-shirt when you take it apart, and you're like, oh, that looks like this, and that looks like this. And it's kind of fun and exciting. Then again, the play comes in. And then after working in that way for a while, I realized the impact of working with these materials on a larger scale level. Textile waste is about 5.8% of the waste stream in the US and about 7% globally. So the more that we can work with these materials and divert them from the waste stream through creativity, there's a greater impact beyond just what you can make out of them and the pleasure you get in the process of doing that, diverting that. So then I got excited about teaching and sharing, meeting and working with other artists that are working in the space because of these different levels and degrees of innovation that naturally take place when working with this. So when I say these materials define my process, when I get my hands on something, sometimes I'll see a material, and people push a lot of materials my way now because they know that I work with them. I'll just get really excited. Like I just found this like pile of bits of rugs that were like old, maybe like old tech, like nice quality rugs, and they're just cut up. And I got really excited about it because they're beautiful and they're made of natural materials. And so what my process involves is I start by exploring the material itself, and I try to look beyond what it was originally designed as. So for instance, say I'm working with sweaters. Sweaters get shrunken easily. They end up with a lot of holes. We outgrow them. So qualities of sweaters are they're cozy and they're soft and they're warm and they're comfortable. And then I say, okay, what other things in the world are these things, you know? Pet beds, mittens, hats, scarves, leg warmers. And then I say, okay, can I draw a line between these two things? Can I use this thing to make this thing because they possess the same qualities? And reusing, part of upcycling is reusing elements that exist in the original thing in creative ways. And I realize when you make something out of something that's unconventionally used to make that thing, people get excited about it. People have a story to tell about it, and they want it. I have one of my most notable items is I used to work for St. Vincent de Paul, and I had this really dirty fabric chair that was very sturdy, usable. It just was not attractive. And then I would have a lot of access to stuffed animals because people discarded a lot, and sometimes they'd have some like dirt on them or whatever, because, you know, that's what happens when you play with stuffed animals. And so I covered this chair just using a fabric hot glue with stuffed animals, and I kind of pieced them together like a giant puzzle. And this chair is so loved, and it's so comfortable and cute and just notable to a lot of people. And it was two things that were literally types of materials heading to the waste stream that consume a lot of space in the waste stream. And it became this really wonderful, lovely, noteworthy, story-worthy thing. So, yeah, sorry, that's a long answer.
No, it's really, I didn't know that about the chair. That's really,
Yeah.
That's a really great story. I'd love to see a picture of that sometime.
Oh, it's at Wildling Collaborative Arts. You could come sit in it if
Okay.
you want. Yeah.
Sounds cool. So is your motivation to reuse those materials, I mean, I guess a combination, but like, is your goal mainly the creative problem solving what inspires you, or is it like the ability to make the sustainable art?
I'd say both, and it depends on who you're talking to. So for me, as I kind of told you my historical process, it started out as making the art, and then now has become the creative problem solving. But I think when you enter into the system on one end, you will always find the other. I think they're naturally coexist. When you start working with recycled and upcycled and used and old discarded materials, you just find there's inspiration there that you can't find at hobby stores materials. And then you just start discovering and unwrapping these layers of value and impact and joy in the process of doing that. So I challenge every one of you to try it.
Yeah, definitely being resourceful is a great innovator, right?
Yeah.
Just being resourceful. Having limitations sometimes creates more innovation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100% that is true for me. Yeah.
Is it worth upcycling if you don't have experience doing this type of work?
100 million %. I was never formally taught in what I did. I started out hand sewing poorly, just because I had things in my head I needed to get out of my head. And then I discovered sewing machines, and then I sewed poorly on sewing machines for quite a while. And then, this is pre-YouTube, by the way.
Yeah, right.
I'm older than YouTube. And yeah, it's, as Justin clearly stated, and this was so true for me, is failure, which is really just success at something you did not set out to accomplish, is part of the process. And just start wherever you are inspired to start and keep moving forward and find and discover resources and be gentle with yourself as you learn. And the big thing about failure is you have to reprogram what that means. Culturally, the word failure has a negative connotation, but in the world of design, it is so important. You build and you learn that way and you grow. So keep it up.
Great. Thank you, Mitra. Okay, we're going to pivot to John Park from the Harmonic Laboratory. And John, I was wondering if you could tell us, to you, what is technology and art, and then how do they intersect with your work?
Great. Maybe to start this, I'll begin with an interesting story, which is about 14 years ago. I was approached by a brand new faculty member who came in from the School of Dance. And he came to me and he said, "Hey, I've never met you before, but I want to do a dance work on volcanoes because I just moved here to the Pacific Northwest. And I want to know what it's like if you mix dance with projection and video art. And what would it look like if we combine that with string orchestra players and we do it on a stage?" And it sort of turned into a 2-year project of what ifs. But what it really turned into also was the idea that all of these art forms that we're familiar with what painting would look like or sculpture would look like, it also is very flexible in the boundaries of what these media can be. I think is crumbling pretty quickly, specifically when we think about how the internet and interdisciplinary work is sort of becoming more flexible and accessible across the internet and across the academy and artists in general. And so my whole journey with this idea of art and technology started with really asking, what if you take technology into a space where we didn't think it belonged? Many of us have phones in our pockets, but we also might not have thought, what else could you do with that phone besides text someone or take a picture? Could that become a tool that will enable something else completely? And in my whole journey, that involved, connecting sensors to modern dancers and having that project imagery behind them on a stage. But as the progress and the work and the failures and successes kind of came and went, this field to me now is becoming even more so about the medium and the site specificity of where you can show work. So, for example, if you've been to the Gordon Hotel before downtown, so the owners of the Gordon approached our group and said, well, we have this big space and we want to make it really great, but we don't know what to do with it. And so our whole approach to that was, well, let's take technology and make a space for artists to show their work on a huge wall, and do that by creating kind of a sculptural collection of 21 giant televisions that all link together to show a very specific kind of animated image. And so it became sort of the idea of a platform to show new work. And now we teach a class every year for young artists to create animation and video work that will be seen by the public in this format that doesn't belong in your pocket. And it's in fact very different when you experience a work that's in a whole new space, in a whole new location, And if it kind of can break your mode of where you should see work and how you should see it, I think there's a huge value to that. So maybe one answer to the question would be that the art and technology blend just allows a lot of the conventions and rules to be broken, and that can be very useful for a viewer to be shaken out of their normative and to experience something new.
That's really cool. I like that. Do you see any ways of technology kind of hindering the artists?
Absolutely. There are many ways in which I think we can be romanced by or sucked into the promise of technology without thinking about the ethics or not thinking about what the costs would be. In technology, the big one is thinking of the turnover of technology, everyone needing a new computer every 3 years or a cell phone every 2 years, and that as a medium, like it starts to build up globally very quickly. So that becomes sort of a hindrance in itself in just what waste is produced. But there are other pieces around, say, put down the phone, put down the computer, and a lot of the problem solving is personal, and it is experiential, and it really should be human. And we don't really need the technology to get there, but sometimes I feel like we get trapped into thinking we do.
That kind of over-reliance sometimes it can happen, or kind of not leaving the paintbrush too far away, maybe.
Right.
Leave it within reach. But then obviously upcycling comes into play again, right? With all that e-waste. Hopefully, some of that stuff is too old, but in play. Okay. I'm just gonna read it word for word because I don't want to mess this up. So your work combines narrative storytelling, game design, and world building in digital environments. And you talk about using augmented reality to slow down time and create portals of solace and care. How do you impact time with your work? And I'm very interested in this part because I was reading this question. It's like, that's amazing. So.
Yeah, great question. Growing up with technology and thinking about how kind of almost ritualized we become with our phones, like check it in the morning, check the email, like all of those things, relying on it for directions. There's like a certain level of like expediency baked into technology and the way we use our smartphones, et cetera. And I'm really interested in thinking about what does slowing down, because the way that we use technology, it's quick, it's loads quickly, it's like at times when we get that email that makes us nervous, our heart rate speeds up, like we have even though it's digital, it's on the phone, it's not necessarily like, you can't really necessarily touch the email. It's still creating a psychic and psychological impact on the body and mind. And so I was doing research on this throughout my work. I went to a really great residency in Hamburg in Germany that was about AI and time. And there I really got to think through with my colleagues and also the mentors as part of the art residency to think about what does it mean to slow down time? How can we think about the way we animate the kind of spaces we build up through technology and intentionally create spaces that invite this slowness? And so as part of that, and it's a continuing part of my work, and the term I mentioned earlier, digital somatics, is creating spaces that invite that. So as part of that residency, I animated 3D water and created a kind of a digital kind of healing space. And so as part of that installation, there were these chairs I made alongside with water vapors on the ground, so they were kind of creating a humid kind of vapor space with the VR headsets that visitors put on, so they can immerse themselves in that meditative space. And so they felt the water visually in the VR headset, but also physically because of the vapors coming out. And I had used lights with a projection of digital water on the ground. So they were kind of immersed in water in 3 different ways. And since then, I've continued making work in this regard. I just closed an exhibition in Austin, Texas at Women and Their Work, where I created a large-scale installation of like a large projection around the body and connecting back to the body, particularly thinking about the the H breath, which is like right here. It's like huh, huh, you activate the back of your throat. And often for people who are chronically ill, who have like, I think we have heard about the idea of like trauma as being passed down, but also healing that is passed down from ancestors. So the work was about activating the breath and the body. And as part of that, I built another VR installation that invited people to go look at their own body and look at the stars. And so I'm really invested in thinking about how can I use technology and what is readily available and slow it down. And how does that slowness really change the way I interact with it? So with like problems or issues with coding and what have you that come up, I don't need to rush through it. I can take my time and create structures that allow me to be more present in myself, because I'm sure as all of you experience where I'm like rushing through things, it's like we're not really connecting to our body and our mind. We're like we're thinking about the future, or either the anxiety is making us think about the future, or when anger comes up, it's immediately about the present, and there's no past or future in that moment of anger. So how can we think about the ways in which we use technology and but think about it through extension of slowing down time and creating a different headspace and also physical space?
So you're really using quite cutting-edge technology in forms like VR and other systems to kind of detach people from their day-to-day technology in a way to slow them down from that kind of process of the instant gratification and the all that stimuli.
Yeah.
That's
It completely changes the way, because when we're in an environment where everything's sped up and everything's going really fast, like it changes the way our brain and our body are connecting. And so when doing like world building with, for that exhibition, I did like made ceramics, I did projections and all of those things, like creating an immersive space where we can put some of our sort of like rules of reality, suspend them for a bit as you walk around the exhibition or in the VR space, and just engage with technology, just like, or the space just operating differently.
What is some of the physiological effects of like entering one of those spaces? What are some of the effects you've had on some of the people who have done it?
Yeah, with the work I did earlier in Germany, when I'm doing like visits with like curators or friends whose work I'm showing my work to, they tell me, because I created like a custom meditation that goes along with that piece. They've shared that I feel really calm because I do like a guided meditation as part of it. I associate with water and digital water. And the second work in Austin, where it's more around the kind of H breath and what I mentioned earlier. Back of the throat is also where people's thyroid gland is. And for folks who have autoimmune conditions, when the thyroid doesn't work, it causes issues in the body. Maybe you've heard the term PCOS and things like that. So for that one, I was addressing that part of that back of my throat. And for that one, I created like a kind of a meditation that's based around that breath. And so I guide people to do like deep breath work. And as part of the installation, I also think about the word somatics, which is a term that's used in therapy, which is referring to soma meaning the body, right? And so I created a custom kind of incense as part of it. So as folks are putting on the headset, they're having a guided kind of breath work around the throat. And they're also smelling, the smell also like is pleasant and immerses them deeper into the VR space. So I'm really interested in thinking about the senses actively and the body actively with technological or quote unquote disembodied spaces.
And the sound of water and all the senses covered, huh?
Yeah.
That's really amazing. I just want to step back for a second. So the last two panelists who have spoken, John and Hiba, would you mind kind of elaborating on the teams that you work with? Because you both mentioned huge projects that are incredibly complex. You're not doing them on your own. What are the kind of roles of the team members you work with, like engineering, coding? I mean, like, what are the kind of the people you work with, the teams you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work on a 3 or 4 person team, depending on what the project is. But very often, electronic music is involved, or composers who are working with string players, musicians. In the past, I've worked with dance for about 10 years, and it's an amazing experience to be in the not the performance hall with dancers, but in the rehearsal studio, and see how they're they're innovating and what that looks like and what muscle memory means to a dancer compared to one of us who might just try not to trip going down the stairs. There's an incredible amount of nuance to working with people in very different fields as yourself. And then also working with fabricators, so welders and those who really can understand physical material, like hearing about the textile industry, is fascinating, and just think how different that is than someone who knows steel and knows wood and electronic components and so on. So I think in a lot of ways, working with a team has the real advantage that I think the team can become a whole when it's really necessary. When the answer requires for the team to act almost like a superhuman who has all these skills and understanding and nuances. And then other times there can be this breakout into specificity and specialty. And it's really wonderful to be able to rely on someone who has those skill sets, who has their welding certificate or have worked with 100-person symphony before. Like that's a pretty amazing thing that not everyone else has.
Yeah, I'm often working across time zones with teams for various galleries and or planning or researching. So for example, for the installation that I did at Women Their Work in Austin, Texas, the work I was describing earlier, I worked with the team at the gallery to not like creating a plan, but also creating a way to execute it, and also building in like fail safes and things like that, because I'm working across Oregon, Texas, have to make ceramics, bake them, but also ship them, making sure they don't break, things like that. Just like small things that end up really impacting. I'm creating a huge vinyl, making sure it's big enough to cover the large wall in the gallery. So yeah, the production of my work and exhibitions is never me. It's always like a whole group of people that I work with intentionally. Most recently too, I just finished teaching like a co-taught course at this place in New York City called School of Poetic Computation. And it was really joyous because it allowed us to teach together in this greater capacity. And there, we were working with people who were there locally to like help us host the class sometimes when we wanted to host in person. So with the art world and art making, it's never just like one person. I mean, though my name might be on something, but it's always like a team of people behind me, and also like all those like 2 a.m. Theorem Reddit posters who like resolved the code issue I'm having that they posted 5 years ago that I looked up. So the people who code and like participate in forums are also part of my not formalized collaborators. And that kind of like solving with code or with like technology just reminds me that. Even when we're learning or self-learning, like behind a computer, behind like watching YouTube tutorials, we're never really alone because the comments are our friends. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That open source nature of, even the most brilliant inventors did it on the shoulders of other creations and other discoveries before them, right? It didn't come out of complete nowhere, even though some person might have had, like Thomas Edison has the credit, but it all came from other people's work too. So all that open source sharing really creates that whole community of a world always innovating and being creative. So important to remember. Thank you.
How do we balance creating art while not getting distracted by our technology and staying connected to ourselves?
Yeah, I have been creating new joy in my life by like my love of reading. Like I'm currently in the middle of reading. It's called like, I'm forgetting the name right now, but it's called How to Dream Really Big Dreams. And it's all about the idea of visioning and dreams. Because often it's like a neglected sphere. People really discount dreams. And especially with the quarantine period, the pandemic, dreams became such a big topic of interest, and it has continued to be mine. And so I'm really interested in like creating structures for me, my own self-imposed structures that work. I talked about making things into a game earlier. I don't like to be on the computer do for long either. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like, for me, sometimes with work, we can just get disembodied into our work, just focusing on the next thing and next thing. And so often when I'm feeling that way, I turn back into my body and say, what does my body need today? And use that as a way to frame my day. Or like I know that after I do X, Y, and Z thing, like I have been teaching for really long hours as of recent, knowing that like I'm gonna come home and take a really, really long bath, like really long bath. Really investing in these, and this sounds simple, but it's not, like these like this intentionality around finding ways to create small joys in my everyday. Because with like stress or with work or getting excited about learning a new program, like currently I'm working on teaching myself like Unreal. This is a video game engine, and knowing that like it's just gonna take time, and I don't need to rush towards a goal, even though it's so cool. I want to learn everything tomorrow, and knowing that like it's gonna take its time. Or I've been noticing lately, the more that I read this like really cool dream book, I want to spend less time on TikTok. I want to spend less time on Instagram, and just building something in for myself that like. What am I hoping to get when I'm on Instagram for like 2 hours? What am I hoping to get? And oftentimes, like, I don't really want to see people's stories. Like, people are living their lives. That's cool. And so when I tune into that question about to myself, like, what do I want to receive from this like online Instagram space or TikTok space? And sometimes I want to disconnect, and then I also want to disconnect and connect back to myself. So it's intentionally putting my phone down or hiding it and then forgetting about where I put it. Like all of those kind of things that I do during the day really help me connect back to myself. And so it's a lot in the dream book that I just mentioned, like there's a whole chapter on like what is like the inner child want, and what is the inner child like desire. And that even though we might have kids and older whatever, like the inner child of each adult never goes away. So what does it mean to connect to the inner child's dreams? And then the chapter goes on and on about different ideas. But thinking about these spheres of our life that we normally think of them like, oh, I have to sleep, or like random dreams. What does it mean to study those things, and what kind of like lessons or like strategies we can apply into our day-to-day? I hope that answers your question. Yeah, making structures that work and that are unique to your creative practice, because often we find ourselves like inadvertently comparing X, Y, and Z, and then being like, okay, where's this coming from? Because it's not coming from me. This actually doesn't work for me. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to move to our last panelist, Parker Bracey. We work together, so it's good to have you up here. Speaking about, like, obviously, your experience in the Spark programs at Lane County, but also the programs now you're a mentor, so you're coming back to now be the teacher. Why do you think it's important for students to have these different out-of-school STEM experiences?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really cool, especially like you said, starting as a youth in a program and then transitioning to a mentor. I think it's a beautiful thing, and I think you get a better understanding of what you're teaching, which is really cool. But I think for me, the biggest thing about like these STEAM experiences outside of the regular school environment is a lot of youth's outlook like in school is like they don't want to learn something because a lot of times it's like, why am I learning this thing? Like, what is the real world like just thing that I'm learning this for? And that was a big thing for me growing up. Like a lot of times in class, I would just be thinking to myself, when am I ever going to use this? Like, I'm never going to use this. And I think that's pretty common. But if you can learn something outside of school, that kind of goes away. And so I really didn't get into any STEAM or STEM things at all in school. I just wasn't really interested. A lot of my time it just wasn't a thing. Like, I wasn't looking into this thing. But as soon as I got out of high school, I just took a summer like internship kind of thing with Spark and got interested and learned all these different things that while I was learning, I was thinking, why didn't I do this in school? And so I just like changing this like idea of how you can learn things, I think is really cool. And I think it's very interesting, like my outlook and a lot of people's outlook outside of school. And it really creates a kind of passion that it's hard to pick up in school, because I think as great as school is, it is like kind of confining sometimes and just blocks off a lot of like the like ability to learn and ability to look at things and have like a genuine passion for things. And so when I got out of school, for me, being in this like fail-safe environment, I was able to pick up a lot of things and learn all these different things that, yes, were offered in school overall, like most of them, but I was able to pick them up in a different way that I wasn't learning them before. And so I think offering these opportunities outside of school opens the door for a lot of different just like open creativity that isn't often found in school.
And before I get to your next question, I was going to point out the picture behind me is kind of an example of what Parker's referring to, that kind of project-based application. Obviously, this was done like in a small like STEM internship environment, so the youth are being paid for their time to be kind of learn and earn, we call it. 2 weeks of skill building and then 2 weeks of inventing in a small group. And so the youth behind me is holding an invention that she and her group made. I can't remember, the name is called Chatter Critters, but basically they have a microcontroller inside. You can see a bit of the LED screen with the X's on the eyes, and that's a 3D printed encasement in the shape like a bear's head. And so basically what it is for this team had a really strong connection with people who are nonverbal, especially young children who are nonverbal, due to their experiences in their life and with siblings and cousins. And so they made this piece that tilted different ways using accelerometer and sensors. It could give you answers, yes, no, maybe, and communicate instead of shaking the head or other things. So it's kind of a creative way to express themselves even though they were nonverbal. And even the t-shirt, which has their logo, they designed the logo, they printed the t-shirt using like vinyl heat presses and stuff. So they learned so much in this 4-week program, right? 3D modeling, 3D printing, coding, all the wiring, soldering irons, and using kind of every tool that they had never experienced before. So a bit of what kind of Parker's alluding to, I think, is just like that, applying it to this independent project of your own team's creation, right? With a focus and a user-centered design, just changed everything in terms of why do I have to learn this? Yeah. You tell me why I have to learn it. Now it's on you to like use it. So that was kind of the secret there. But I do want to get to the next question for Parker. How have you been able to take like kind of the values that you learned in Spark programs and apply them to other parts of your life?
Yeah, I think the biggest value that I've learned in my life is like just the whole idea of like prototyping and taking one idea, starting like maybe it's a crazy wild idea that you can't even bring into fruition, but taking this idea and starting out with the first like cardboard cutout and doing this and like taking this cardboard cutout and looking at it and thinking like, how can I bring this into the final vision that I had before? And so I look at prototyping as like this failure, like it's all a failure until the very end. You're gonna fail over and over again, and if you can like rewire the way that you look at failure, you'll end up with a product or something that you're trying to create. And so I really appreciate like this value that I've learned from Spark because I have to use it in my life multiple times. I wanted to learn how to sew. I had no background in sewing at all. None of my family can sew. Like no one around me could sew, but I really wanted to learn how to make a pair of pants. And so I just decided to find someone or find something. I got a sewing machine for like $20, and I just started experimenting over and over again until eventually I got resources and found people and other networks that could help me learn how to make a pair of jeans, and now I've made multiple pairs since. So just finding different ways to prototype and change and fail and reevaluate over and over again to get to your end destination is, I think, the biggest thing I've learned being in Spark for a couple of years that I have. And so I think it's a beautiful thing.
It's wonderful to hear about this program for youth. But what about non-youth who are looking for similar opportunities?
But then, like, places like Mecca and some other resources, I know there was the one local makerspace in town that unfortunately had a fire about a month ago or so, which is tragic, because that's where a lot of the adult makers in the community were going to use those facilities and equipment. Maybe Mitra can speak more to the possibilities of adults' learning environments.
Yeah, there's they're popping up. I teach, so there's some community arts spaces that we teach these skills. We teach sewing at Mecca, a lot of different art forms. Also at Wildling Collaborative Arts is a space where you can learn stained glass, and you can learn rug tufting and ceramics and industrial sewing. But we need to create more of these spaces. It's definitely a need in the community. There's a few little maker spaces around. There's like Fuse, which is focused on jewelry. If you have access to the university, the craft center there is amazing. But yeah, we need that. Let's keep saying that and see what happens. I had a question for you. What could schools be doing differently to encourage the relevancy of what you're learning there, like the out-of-school programs did?
That is a great question. It's hard. I don't even really know how to answer that, to be honest, just because it is hard being young. And maybe for me, the reason that my perspective changed is because I got older and I got out of school. Like, I didn't start till I was 18 out of school. So maybe that was the reason that it was different for me. But I think just creating a more fail-safe environment. I think when you have all this stress on like getting your grade and getting these like things correct and everything needs to be correct, it's hard to have like this creative passion for something when all you care about is it being right and having like the right thing, getting the grade. Because I just remember for me, like, there wasn't much creativity or art in what I was doing because I just wanted it to be correct and I wanted to be viewed as like the right thing and get the good grade. So when I got out of school and I joined Spark, there was no grade, there was no nothing. It was just like, create this thing, make it work, innovate it, change it, make something, invent something. For me, when I did Invention Lab, which is the program that we offer in the summer, we made like a jacket that lit up and it had some other like technology in it. And back then we couldn't like make the jacket or anything, so we bought it. But now like we could fully draft the jacket, sew the jacket, and then install some technology in the jacket, which is really cool. And so that's just something that we've learned since joining. But I think just creating more of a fail-safe environment and making it less about like getting things correct, doing this a certain way, would enable students to create more freely and maybe have some more passion in what they're doing.
Certainly the time invested in these projects doesn't suit itself to a 45-minute class or once a week. It's almost unfair. The teachers have one hand tied behind their back sometimes to be able to try to impart all this wonderful knowledge, but then the application, the real world application, that's the thing that doesn't have the class time for. So, yeah.
The following is a response to a commercial called Crush for an iPad.
Yeah. I think for the most part I agree with that because this kind of thinking that the ad sort of represented, where it's like do away with the messiness of reality and like this new sort of like digitality where things are neatly organized and tucked away, and that kind of sort of like thinking doesn't align with like what the natural way that we live our lives, which is like, yes, or some order and some chaos, and it's very different to do something digitally versus physically, and that doesn't mean that they're at odds with each other. That I often think about, what you brought up earlier around like accessibility, but also like addressing various disabilities. Like, what is this for? Like, for example, I've heard and learned about the ways that in terms of like motion sensor technology can be used to help people who have different like variations around sight and not being able to see visually. And so what are the ways that technology the ways that we use technology can be used as a way to assist people and make people's lives richer, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Also like, the ways that, the ways that's being like normalized or put into various programs, like teachers' class on Photoshop. And one thing, with like, and now in the new Photoshop, AI is built into it. And so I'm doing teaching around that as well. So like with the AI prompt, you can say like, give me a gold background, right? But like in the prompt, you can't say, make a creative project for me. That's a triptych, that's 3 images that addresses landscape, place, and space. You can't put that in, right? Like, or you can say green background, green grass, or whatever, blue flowers, but it's not gonna give you exactly that. So it's like this idea of a shortcut, that it's being introduced to us as. But sometimes it's like, taking the long road, even though it takes a little bit more time, is more enriching. And so like to your point that you raised earlier, like I want to live or be part of co-creating a reality where we embrace the messiness of life, and bring that into through art making and practice. I think this idea of creating a very sanitized presentation and things like that are not actually are an artifice. So I want to be in spaces where messiness and the chaos that we co-create and share are more readily embraced, rather than trying to create a more sanitary sort of space, which actually is a farce, as I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the way I look at it is it's not replacing it, but it's just a different thing. Because you still have all these things, but I think one interesting thing from just my personal experience and what I've seen is a lot of youth now, they don't want a grand piano. They're not going to do anything with the grand. They're not going to do anything even painting and stuff. They would rather just see the iPad. I think that's not an overall every youth, but I think that's in general a lot of youth would rather the technology. And so I think times have just changed, and I hate to say times are changing, but times I think have changed a little bit, and it is more accessible for everyone, like you said, for youth, people with disabilities, and just accessibility in general. Having the technology as well as having the other things, I think is very important. And like you were saying in the school, I think having the iPads like this is just, that's not better, but it's just easier overall with people with different things that they're dealing with. Just having this iPad and having that, it being able to do all these different things, I think is really cool, and it's just a very important thing.
I wanted to say I consider myself not very savvy technologically. It's a hindrance for me, trying to, especially in spaces where I'm required to produce work in certain new types of technology. I think there's a lot to be said about it. I think for me, I use it as a tool, and we kind of had started this conversation before this panel started, is using technology as a tool versus kind of an art form. I can do things with my hands, but the type of learning or skills involved in learning constantly new technology platforms is challenging for me. And I think there's something to be said about the process of failure that we've been discussing throughout this, that technology somewhat eliminates. So you're missing out the experience on trying things in certain ways and failing and learning from those failures, because there's it doesn't allow you to in some ways. It can keep people from trying things if they feel like they just don't understand or can't get it. But I think there's space for technology in art as a new form of art. My husband's a musician, and he just plays the guitar, but he also uses a lot of these pedals to distort, and he finds all these new sounds and and I'm sure you can agree with this, John, too, about the combination of classic arts and technology. You create all new works of art there in that space. There's space, yes. But yeah, I think we all have a lot to say about that. I know you.
I was just going to add, in the iPad realm, the software design is very much around eliminating someone to feel like they're failing. You're supposed to think that's Apple's big shtick, is that it's easy and it just works, but that also means that you don't know what it's like to fail on an iPad, ever. And it becomes really problematic and antithetical to this conversation around the creative process requiring that. And so, if maybe the problem isn't the iPad or isn't even Apple, but it's how we think about software, or can we build software where it's okay to fail and feel foolish sometimes, but then get better and learn from it. And maybe some games do that. I think, I think that's maybe one space.
Oh goodness. Okay. All right, I think we have one more slide. Question for the audience. True story. So a fully, completely AI-generated painting, if you can call it a paint, I don't know. It's a digitally printed painting, piece of art, sold for over $400,000 at Christie's auction house in New York in 2018. The prints and multiples category, because they couldn't call it a painting, obviously. And it is signed by the equation that produced it, the algorithm that produced it. That's the artist's signature. So, I got first question, would anybody consider buying? No, not for that money, but
$42.
Yes, call it $42 for the sake of cough a couple of zeros off there. I mean, if you see a piece of art that's cool enough looking, but it's completely AI generated, would you buy it? If it looks cool, yeah. If it inspires you in some way. Huh. What was that? Sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Super duper cool, yeah.
Okay, so how this painting was created was with the GAN. I
Okay.
will just break this down. So it's the generative adversarial network. It's a common equation used in AI technology, so not just artists using it. When the term using AI as a tool, it's not quite like you were saying with Photoshop, we go in, we say we want a gold wall. It is a group of people collaborating together over multiple years, basically pumping in constant different works of art. There's a couple different ways people are doing it. Some people are pumping in every type of art form that we've made and different art style and letting it create art based off that in different forms and styles. And then the other way people are doing it, like how this lovely portrait gentleman thing here was created, was it uploaded basically every hand-painted portrait that's ever been known to man and then had it create its own artwork. And what the GAN network does, it's an equation that both creates the thing and then judges the thing. So it's not just used in art, it's used in most AI to decide what actually gets put out. It creates something and instantly judges it and then releases it to you. So how this one was made was through years of basically putting in every portrait that ever existed and then pumping out a variety, hundreds and hundreds and thousands and probably millions of different portraits until the equation found one it liked and said, this was made by a human. We're pretty sure of it, because the computer said that. And then that's the one they chose. And they have a variety of different themes that they've done and different sort of artwork themes, and they have made ones. This is the one that is sold. This was the first one, and it's sold for the most, and one has not been sold for that amount of money since, because this was first. So it's cool. Yep, so it's a novelty a little bit. Yeah, and it was sold in prints, not as a painting. And that's the GAN network, and so that's how that was made.
I just wanted to say something about the experience of art from the person purchasing it or valuing it is so different. Like I teach classes on how to price art if you're making it, and value is so relative. And so I mean, there's pieces of art that are generated by AI that I've found interesting and meaningful to me. I think art can be for anyone, and the way that it's produced can be meaningful sometimes. Like I find art in nature, in pieces of wood, and in things I'm looking at, in birds and clouds, and that's not intentional. So I just think think there needs to be space for that question to be really open, and like I don't think we should. I mean, there's judgment involved in production and things. I think there's space for everything. And the more we venture into the world of AI and the different ways that we make art, there's going to be new space that's made and new experiences when that starts colliding with classical ways of art and different people's consumption value of it and everything. But I just wanted to bring up that there's room for everything out there, and the relativity of art in the world is a beautiful thing too. Yeah. Well, yeah, I will bring that up too. There is, in the world of art, like working with galleries that sell art galleries, there's lines of like, I think there needs to be disclosure for sure. Like this is made by a person or AI or an experience or plotting data points. I think if the person or the way that art is generated is important to people, it needs to be disclosed. And their spaces, I'm sure, will be for AI generated art, and their spaces for human generated art and nature generated art and everything. But I do think, how we value art again is important and beautiful, and, sounds made from space, things like plotting meteorological data and creating art out of it. It's interesting to certain people and not to others. So, but yeah, transparency.
Thank you for listening. We hope to see you at upcoming community conversations. For more details, please visit holtcenter.org.